Oh, there's a sweet spirit in this place. We've come to focus on the suffering with all of the magnificent smiles and styles that we hear, because there's some brothers and sisters of all colors in Santa Ana who come through this magnificent clinic of our dear brother Dr. G and his visionary leadership. Give it up for Dr. G, the one and only Dr. G. Yes, indeed. Brilliant, brave, committed, convicted. And as you know, I stand here very much based on a commitment to those young brothers and sisters of all colors who come through your clinic. But there happens to be a very, very special one who works at your clinic. I was thinking about that when the band was playing. Persian jazz. You see, that's the coming together of black folk and Persian folk. Yeah, that's a deep combination, isn't it? Oh, that's a powerful combination. And so when you bring together Brother Cornel West and Professor Dr. Sister, my dear wife, magnificent wife, Anahita Madavi West. Stand up, my baby. Stand up, baby. Stand up. Yes, when she told me she was on her way to Norooz Clinic, I said, oh, I've got to be there. And I was able to enter that space. And it is a consecrated space. Because, see, Dr. G, I want to tell his mother, where's his magnificent mother? Where is she? Where is she? Stand up. There she is. Stand up. Give it up for his magnificent mother. And sister, too, if she's here. Sister, too, if she's here. There she is. Stand up, my dear sister. It's a family. Stepfather, stepfather, stand up, my brother. There we go. Yes, indeed. Know that his leadership consecrates the space. And so when I was able to go over to the clinic, it was clear to me this was no ordinary clinic. Something extraordinary was going on. And so when Anahita asked me to be a part of this movement, because that's really what it is. It's a movement. We said we've got to have some very, very special people at the table, and sitting next to her is one of the most distinguished professors and forces for good in Orange County. Her name is Professor Kim Branch Stewart. Stand up, Professor. Stand up with her magnificent husband, Brother Lewis. Both of y'all stand up, both of you. There you go. Give it up for them. Oh, indeed. Special table. Special table. Then you got my favorite Persian cousin with Brother Sean. Oh, my God, yes. Oh, and blessed Ruby, too. I can go on and on and on. Bijan and his magnificent wife, Paddy. Oh, my God. And then, I mean, I don't want to exclude anybody. I can go on and on here. But what I'm saying essentially is you're at the right place in being here. That's all right. Let the baby cry. That's all right. Oh, that's right. Let the baby cry. That's nothing against that. No harm whatsoever. But what needs to be highlighted for me is the fact that given where we are in the culture, in the country, in the world, the hounds of hell have been thoroughly unleashed. Hatred, greed, fear, hypocrisy, inconsistency, shot through every nook and cranny of every corner of the globe. Now, we've been focusing in the last few weeks on what's going on in our beloved Iran. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Iranian people are great people. And I'm not just talking about Cyrus and the empire. I'm talking about their resilience and resistance that is grounded in family, grounded in civic associations, grounded in memory, and grounded in vision. Oh, yes, that's what we're talking about. I was reading my dear sister Farouk Farazad's last poem before she died in 1967 called A Rebirth. My life is a dark verse. She ends with that small, sad mermaid who dies at night but arises in the dawn, because that deep love, freedom, dignity, resistance, resilience always produces something new. And it's connected to this clinic. When I see my dear sister Nina and your magnificent leadership, Sister Cindy, where is Sister Cindy? Where is she? Oh, yes, indeed. Her magnificent leadership. And Brother Chris, too. The connection between what takes place in that clinic and what is taking place on the streets of our beloved Iran must not go overlooked. Must not go overlooked. And I look at it through the lens of my own history, my own community, my own people. I come out of a people who for 400 years have been looking at chronic hatred in the face and keep dishing out love warriors every generation. That's where Martin Luther King Jr. comes from. That's where John Coltrane's Love Supreme comes from. That's where Aretha Franklin's Respect comes from. That's where James Baldwin's essays come from. That love forces us to take off the mask we cannot take off, that mask that we fear. We have to live within and shatter it, and then to straighten our backs up and walk with a style and a smile and a dignity. That's what's happening with not just the young sisters on the streets of Iran, but the brothers too. It is a collective effort in the face of overwhelming oppression and repression. And the music is in no way ornamental or decorative. It is constitutive of them. It is constitutive of us. This clinic understands the centrality of the arts. The arts are not fascinating moments in which we get titillated and stimulated. No, they help make who we are, because, as I told the musicians earlier today, the artists, the musicians, are the vanguard of the species. They give us a foretaste of the love, a foretaste of the freedom, a foretaste of the courage. That's precisely what the great Percy Shelley meant, that revolutionary poet of England, when he said, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. And he was not just talking about versifiers. He was talking about all human beings who muster the courage to empathize with the suffering of others and to then generate a vision that authorizes another and better world. Every great artist, from Rumi to Beethoven, every great artist, the fusion band that we heard, playing instruments that I know not of. I didn't know what that instrument was that you started off with, but I know it wasn't a guitar as I understood it. Was that a distinctive Persian instrument? It's called what? The oud. Oh, it was sounding good. Give it up for the musicians. Give it up for the musicians. Oh, yes. But you authorize a different world. The world of greed and hatred, the world of fear, the world of hypocrisy, the world of oppression and subjugation and persecution. We need some powers, persons, forces to authorize something different. That's what goes on in the clinic. Because I come from a people who've been traumatized for 400 years, taught to hate themselves, degraded, demeaned. But what have we done at our best? We've produced wounded healers, not just wounded hurters. And this clinic is about producing wounded healers. And what is a wounded healer? First, you have to be honest enough about your own wounds and bruises and scars. If you walk around thinking you're pure and pristine, free of spot or wrinkle, if you think you don't need any help, then you need to get off the crack pipe. Be honest with yourself. What sits at the very center of what it is to be human is the call for help. Everybody needs help. Now, we in America have a myth of self-help. We did everything ourselves. I said, oh, really? You gave birth to yourself too, I guess. You taught yourself language too, huh? No, all of us are who we are because somebody loved us. Somebody cared for us. I know that's true for me. My brother talked about it in terms of the death of your loved one. We felt that just as we felt the story. You connected with our humanity. And it's so hard these days to get beyond skin pigmentation and ethnicity and gender and sexual orientation and national identity. No, at this clinic, we're concerned about humanity at its deepest level. Is that right, my dear brother? Is that right, my dear brother? Humanity. And yes, as human beings, we all come in couched in certain colors and genders and classes and national identities. But I know I come from a tradition of black people that taught me decade after decade that a precious life in Iran has exactly the same status, significance, and importance as a life in Santa Ana, in South Side of Chicago, on the east side of LA with my Chicano brothers and sisters, with Ethiopians, with the Turkish and the Guatemalans, human life across the board. And that shatters then any idolizing of some flag that gets in the way of our feelings and our empathy. It shatters race, it shatters gender, it shatters region, it shatters anything that gets in the way of our human connection. And what takes place at this clinic is at its best the human connection mediated with the mastery of certain kinds of techniques. Anahita shows me all of these different techniques she uses with her clients, and this magnificent thing to hear about after in terms of how she connects her deep compassion with her training. And this is very important. This is very important. I know I'm not going to go on too much longer, but I've been blessed to teach for 47 years. And in each classroom, when the students enter, I tell them, you have come to this class to learn how to die. And they say, oh, I thought I was trying to get a grade and get a diploma and a degree. I said, no. We take very seriously line 38A of Plato's Apology, where the examined life is not worth living, and the unexamined life is not worth living, and the examined life is painful. That's what happens at the clinic. You get your life examined. And any time you give up a certain assumption about yourself, a certain presupposition about the world, that's a form of death. because that's what education is. To learn how to critically examine yourself and give up some of those things about yourself that's getting in the way of your better self. And when you let them go, you emerge a better self, so that there is no life without death. There's no growth without death. There's no maturation without death. There's no development without death. And most importantly, there is no love without death. Love itself is a form of death. When I fell in love with Anahita, something in me died. Some of that narcissism had to go. And it fights back all the time. Some of that hedonism had to go. Some of that narrowness had to go. Some of that provincialism had to go. And you emerge a stronger self connected with another self, which means that you learn how to die in order to learn how to live. And the clinic is in part about getting folk to be open enough and vulnerable enough to learn how to die, so they can learn how to live and be stronger and be more determined with a sense of dignity and vision. Just like America will never, ever learn how to live until white supremacy dies and male supremacy dies and wealth inequality, indifference to the poor dies. The same is true on the global scale. America will never be what it is until its vicious forms of militarism, too often losing sight of others, dropping drones on folk in Somalia and Pakistan as if a baby in Somalia doesn't have the same value as a baby in New York City. That's got to die too. In our blessed Iran, a whole lot's got to die. Stay in contact with the precious humanity of each and every brother and sister in Iran. And all of our institutions and traditions can get in the way. Now, I speak as a Christian. And I know the levels of barbarity and atrocity that Christianity has contributed to the world. No doubt about that. I'm thoroughly convinced that if Jesus were here, he would be put on the cross, and the Christians would be in the vanguard of putting him on the cross. But every religion has its institutional forms that lose sight. The precious Islamic tradition, at its worst, loses sight of the humanity of too many people. At its best, it can be grand and noble. Judaism, at its worst, loses sight of the humanity of others. We've got too many precious Jewish brothers and sisters too well adjusted to the suffering of Palestinian brothers and sisters. It needs to be called into question. It has nothing whatsoever to do with anti-Jewish sensibility. It's in the name of Jewish values. It's in the name of Amos. It's in the name of Esther that you say, these Palestinians are human beings, and if it will happen to Jewish brothers and sisters, we needed to be just as in solidarity with them as with anyone else. We're talking about morality and spirituality and being consistent. So it is at the clinic. And it's not about narrow politics. It's about being attentive to the suffering of other human beings and trying to get them to examine themselves in such a way that they can flower and flourish. But one thing, and I'll stop here, but let us never forget, we talk about Socrates. He's such a magnificent figure in so many ways. Never wrote a word. Never wrote a word. He did write some music at the end of his life in prison. Not for Plato and Aristophanes and others, we wouldn't know anything about Socrates. And we don't encourage that among our students. They're going to have to learn how to write, you know. But Socrates also never sheds a tear. He never cries. Norooz Clinic, you're going to see some tears. Because anybody who has never shed a tear has never loved anybody. Never. Socrates, we love you, brother. but you love wisdom in the abstract. You didn't love people in the concrete. When you love your mama and your daddy and you see them in the coffin, there's no harm in shedding tears. That's what we love about our Jewish brothers and sisters in Hebrew scripture. It begins with cries of affliction of an enslaved people in Egypt. That's what I love about Jesus. Jesus weeps. Muhammad, full of compassion, mercy. Each and every one of you, I'm sure, have shed tears in your life, which means you already, in some sense, have gone beyond Socrates. You may not be at his level in terms of critical interrogation and scrutiny, but if you shed a tear, you have experienced something profoundly human, which is the shattering of a heart. It could be in betrayal. It could be death, dread, despair, disappointment, disenchantment, all of the various sources of tears. Sometimes tears of sorrow, sometimes tears of joy. And this clinic is about bringing the best of the Socratic legacy of self-examination with the prophetic legacy of shedding tears, which is a sign of shattering the numbness inside of our hearts and souls, of doing away with the indifference toward the suffering of others. Indifference is the one trait that makes the very angels weep. Great Rabbi Heschel used to say, indifference, the evil's more insidious than evil itself. And this clinic is a countervailing force against the callousness and the indifference. So Dr. G has a philosophical vision that informs what happens on the ground. And he tells me this all the time. We've had wonderful sessions wrestling with these issues. But most importantly, it preserves its fallibility and its humility. It keeps one's feet on the ground. And just like the jazz musicians, it allows things to get improvisational, flexible and fluid. Because when you got your feet on the ground and you're fallible and improvisational, what does that mean? You got to learn how to listen. Listen very closely when the young folk and the others come through the clinic. You follow the anthem of black people, which is lift every voice. It's not lift every echo. We live in a culture, echo chambers. And so many people who think they have a voice just have an echo. They're just an extension of that chamber. We got our magnificent artist here, towering figure, finding his voice on the canvas. Love Rembrandt, yes. I got my own voice too. I appreciate Rembrandt. Prodigal son means much, but no, I got my own way of putting things together. So it is with the clinic. And so we are all blessed to be here today, and I just hope we raise so much money that we don't even have to worry about raising the money and being able to focus on the precious folk coming through that clinic. But please be supportive of my brother and make sure that we keep the focus where it always belongs, which is on folk wrestling with the suffering. Thank you all so very much.
Brother West, please join us on the stage. Thank you. Okay. A very quick dialogue. I would like to pick Dr. West's brain about mental health. So first and foremost, what I would like to do is actually read a few excerpts from his book, Hope on a Tightrope. But before I do that, I have heard something about you, how you describe yourself, which I want to start with that, which tells me your level of connectedness to all human beings. I really love that about you. The towering figure like Brother West, who is so approachable, who is so accessible, who walks amongst people, how we hardly get any type of similar connection with a reputable, famous, intellectual, philosopher, author, and leader in our communities. So what I've heard about you is that you describe yourself as the blues man in the life of the mind and the jazz man in the world of ideas. That is so beautiful to me. That is your description. Instead of leading with accolades, with degrees, with materialism, with connection, building walls between yourself and others, that you connect to others via such a thing that's so common to all of us, blues and jazz. Everybody loves blues and jazz. So first and foremost, thank you for that. Thank you for being so humble, so caring, and so loving. I don't know if everybody gets that from you, but I do. Now, having said that, I want to share some excerpts from your book that have moved me very, very much. And then I would like to ask you a few questions. So first and foremost, you mentioned here something very important. Well, like old people, I'm getting old, right? So, wisdom comes from wrestling with despair and not allowing despair to have the last word. That's why hope is always blood-stained and tear-soaked. I'm going to read a few more excerpts and then ask my question, because these they relate to mental health. People cannot live on arguments. They might be influenced by arguments, but they don't live on arguments. They live on love, care, respect, touch, and so forth. We see so much of arguments happening in our world nowadays. We live in a polarized world. Everywhere we go, people just debate and argue stuff with each other. They don't live on love, caring, and connection. Another important part, which brings us closer to what I want to ask Dr. West. To be modern is to be suspicious of authority telling you how to choose. The church isn't going to tell me how to choose. Mama isn't going to tell me. Daddy isn't going to tell me, because a lot of these authorities have really made a wreck of the world. I must ask myself how I will choose. It requires self-trust and self-reliance. No authority, no tradition, nothing external to me is going to tell me how to choose. It is just me, myself, and I. The irony is, if the only authority is the self, then will that also make a wreck of the world? That's very, very profound. If we ditch authority, if we listen to ourselves, how can we separate distraction, the deception of thought, the deception of intelligence that splits us within ourselves and with everybody else? And then you go forward saying, to be human, you must bear witness to justice. Justice is what love looks like in public. To be human is love and be loved. So this is my question now. And you lead with that all the time. I have seen that. You always lead with love. You embody love. That is extremely hard to do in this polarized world, in talks, conversations between the left and right, between the conservative and the liberal, between the Republican and Democrat, between this and that, pro-abortion, against abortion, and we all live in the same community fighting against each other. part of what we see in mental health, because we see everybody, we don't discriminate against the Republican or Democrat. A human being is a human being in distress comes to our clinic. What they struggle with, regardless of the side of the equation, is fear, shame, and guilt. No matter what comes up, when we say slavery, no matter what side of the equation you're on, same feelings come up. Fear, shame, and guilt. And none of us connect across the aisle in regards to these feelings. We all separate ourselves from each other by relying so much on our intellect and the deception of our intellect. How can we build up walls between ourselves very much because we are afraid, we feel guilty, and we are ashamed? How can we exercise love and reduce these walls between us so we can create a dialogue between people? How can we do that? I want to pick your brain.
No, but I mean, that's exactly what you all do at the clinic. Yourself, Anahita, and the others, that's what you all do. That when someone comes in, you see a human being who is suffering and shuddering and struggling and often failing, but you don't lose sight of their possibility. You believe in them. We had a wonderful moment. My dear sisters, I don't know if she's here, the student who was here. We talked to my dear sister, Professor Kim. She was saying, as a student, when I encountered her in Professor Branch Stewart's class, she believed in me, I didn't believe in myself. Her sense of possibility was opened by that steadfast commitment. Because let's define what love is. Love is a steadfast commitment to the well-being of others. That's what it is. I mean, in the religious sense, it comes out of Hebrew scripture, right? It's hesed. What is hesed? Loving kindness, steadfast love. And there it's to the orphan, the widow, the motherless, the fatherless, the subjugated, and the oppressed. And that's biblical. And that flows right into Christianity, right into Islam. To be human is to be in service to those who are catching hell. Now, we used to say in my church, if the kingdom of God is within you, then everywhere you go, you ought to leave a little heaven behind. That's the same point. That's the same point. What kind of heaven are you leaving behind? What is inside of you that allows you to see that patient and say, I'm a human being just like you. I'm struggling. I'm shuddering. I'm suffering just like you. But I think I can provide an insight as a guide and counselor, not in an arrogant mode of telling them what to do. I'm learning that over and over again from Anahita now. But get them to see their own potential to the degree to which they're able to believe in themselves. Sean does, he's been doing that for 20-some years, right? Is that right, my brother? And he's a master at it. Well, you know this brother I'm talking about. This brother's a master at it, Lord have mercy. So in that sense, it's a matter of seeing what you all actually do all the time. And then trying to express it in such a way that the larger society can see. Without that love and care and service to others, that's the glue that holds the society together. And without it, you got fascism. And fascism is nothing but what? It is survival of the slickest, obsessed with the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. Say anything, do anything, no accountability, no answerability, say it with impunity, crush others, think you can get away with it, and act as if chickens don't come home to roost. Act as if you're not going to reap what you sow. Oh, there's my dear sister I was talking about. There she is, and I was talking about. Yes, indeed. Was I fair to your characterization, my sister? Because your testimony, your truth-telling in terms of your love of your teacher and the teacher's love of you is the best example of the answer to her question. Absolutely. Your name is? Johnny. Give it up for our dear sister. Give it up for our sister there. Oh, yes, absolutely, absolutely.
We may have some questions from the audience, I'm not sure, because that is what is displayed.
Let me just say a quick word about despair. Because
yes.
you see, the thing is, you know, Goethe, the great German poet, used to say, he or she who has never despaired has never lived. You see, it's only narrowly American to think you can make it from womb to tomb and never despair because you're in a pursuit of happiness. To be human is to wrestle with despair. It's just like Jacob wrestling with despair in the 32nd chapter of Genesis. Jacob, what you gonna do? I'm wounded. I'm hit. I'm losing confidence in myself, but I feel a new energy. That's the great question of John Keats. Energy or despair? I choose energy. That's what the great John Keats wrote to his brother in Kentucky. He's dead at 25, but he got the odes out. He wrote those odes of such power. Energy, but the energy has to be filtered through moral and spiritual channels. And that's precisely what Muhammad, precisely what Jesus, precisely what Amos and Esther, precisely what the grand spiritual teachers have tried to bequeath to the species. How do you muster your spirit and channel it in such a way that is love and justice and not hatred and revenge? And that's always an uphill battle, though, brother, because most people who opt for love and justice, are waiting to be crushed. That's the ways of the world. You get killed, assassinated, misunderstood, misconstrued, marginalized, lied on. That's the ways of the world. And they become the ones who are exemplary of a love and justice that seemingly can never be realized, but we know in our own lives, and part of their afterlife is at work in our life. Just like our mamas and daddies and grandparents and ancestors, we know working in us is the best that they poured into us. And even though the love warriors and the freedom fighters and the wounded healers tend to be on the margins, that without those margins, the sinner would collapse. As Yates says, a sinner cannot hold. And we're living in a world in which the center is not holding, it's collapsing. Not just in Iran, but in a whole host of places around the world, including the United States. Oh my God, absolutely.
Thank you. One of our goals, really one of my personal goals, is to work against that. And I believe we can achieve that by mere means of having dialogue with each other. We too often attack, criticize, and again, focus too much of the fear, guilt, and shame. I'm wondering, on the public discourse, on that level, how can we help people overcome that? Do you, let me be a little bit provocative if you don't mind.
Oh, sure.
Do you feel fear, guilt, and shame when you are in those discussions, when you are confronted by many, many people, when you are on the streets and people are in your face and you are having that discourse and dialogue or debate with them? And how do you overcome those?
Well, I mean, I think those things are always already shot through one's personality. Those are one of the things that have to be not just wrestled with, but pushed back in that learning how to die in order to learn how to live. Because we never eliminate hatred, greed, guilt, and so forth completely. I don't believe there's a clean slate. See, we human beings are not clean slate creatures. Our past is always operating in our present. The question is, we got the best of a past, we have the worst of a past. But at the center of it has to be the most powerful, the most frightening, the most inescapable, and at times the most terrifying force, which is love. That's the reason why I even talk about justice. I tell the young folk all the time, Justice, justice, justice. Any justice that's only justice soon degenerates into something less than justice. If you're not loving the people and caring for the people, you're not going to be in the justice movement that long. That's just a career move. That's a strategic move for a new opportunity that you want. You're not really caring for the people. That's just talk. Now, we know justice is crucial, fundamental, is not the foundation. That's why I say justice is what love looks like in public. Just like tenderness is what love feels like in private. And there's something about tenderness and sweetness and kindness and love that's dealing on a different frequency than justice. That's why Martin Luther King Jr. was not primarily a justice seeker. He was a love warrior. So he could stay in contact with the Ku Klux Klan's humanity, even as they tried to kill him. Not because he's sadomasochistic, but because he knows they were made in the image of the same God that he was made in the image of. They were choosing to be wholesale gangsters trying to kill black people and Jews and Catholics and others. And Martin would say, I was a gangster before I met Jesus, and now I'm a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivities. So I know what it's like to be a gangster. There's some gangster in me. I have to kill it every day. I got to conquer it every day. And you remember Dorothy Day, that great Catholic activist, a vanilla sister, a white sister. She wrote a eulogy for Martin Luther King Jr. One line: Martin Luther King Jr. learned how to die daily. Drop the mic. That's all she had to say. Because as a love warrior, he was enacting precisely what we talked about. That's what the clinic does, brother. That's what the word is out on you all. You all are love warriors. Deep love warriors and freedom fighters and wounded healers. And joy spreaders. That's another thing. You see, you can't talk about jazz without talking about the joy. Look at Louis Armstrong. We watched Louis Armstrong last night. He had so much joy. And what do people say about Louis Armstrong? He was the saddest man one would ever see under certain circumstances. And at the same time, he had more joy in him. He's almost like Baal Shem Tov in Judaism, you know. He's just overjoyed. Every time you see him, he's just bubbling over. Dizzy Gillespie was like that. Sarah Vaughan was like that. I knew Sarah. You spend much time lighting up her cigarette. She was a chain smoker, but the greatest vocalist of the 20th century. Full of that joy. Stevie Wonder's like that. Where you get the joy from? You've been treated like a dog daily. Well, I got a secret. I had a mama who loved me. I had a daddy who cared. I had a sister and a brother who was concerned. I spent a little time at Norooz Clinic. Picked up on the love and the care and the concern, you see. That's what keeps folk going in the face of the despair. The despair that's not eliminated, it is overcome. It is overcome. That's what the anthem of the Black Freedom Movement in the 1960s was what? We shall overcome. Overcome doesn't mean you're eliminating anything. You're not eliminating white supremacy. You're pushing it back, and you're trying to get white folk to see, why are you choosing to be a gangster? Don't you realize you're going to run up against the wall? You're going to live a joyless life no matter how many pleasures you get, how much money you get, how much wealth you get. Your soul going to be empty and your heart is vacuous. When they put you in the grave, a life that could have been so rich, so spiritually wasted, even given all the money and status they accrued, you see. That's the kind of insights that takes place at the clinic, and that's what's needed. And there's other places where this is going on too, but that's what is needed. It's the kind of thing that Sister Kim and Sister Anna hate to talk about all the time as they mutually empower each other as professors and as psychologists and so forth. It's just a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing to behold. But we're not naive. You know, we know that you can be crushed, just like our brothers and sisters right now in the streets in Iran, though. You can see the forces trying to crush their spirits and their bodies and their movements. And you say you can crush it at the moment, but the spirits will live far beyond any of the repressive forces in place.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Brother West. Give it up for everybody, for Dr. West. Thank you for honoring us. We really appreciate it. One last thing that I have you here on board, I want to share something with you. 5 minutes, they tell me. Remember that I shared with you, I want to tell you how I pull through and I don't get traumatized. I haven't, by listening to 16,000 times to people who went through their trauma with me. And that relates to what Brother West is talking about. That relates to what's going on in the world, and we are surrounded by it. That relates to what's going on in Iran. And even more, what is going on in between people, between every one of us. The reason I didn't burn out and I didn't fall apart and I knew steadfastly inside of me that every one of my clients pulled through is because when I was growing up, I had an amazing role model who even to today remains my first and foremost role model. And she, that's my mother, she showed me throughout 30 years of putting up with domestic violence, putting up with loneliness, putting up with failures, with despair, over and over again. When she was left alone, she was abandoned, she started fresh, she was ejected and rejected by her own culture and her own country, that she was able to bounce back. And that is my mother, Parnia Razi, right here. If you stay around, she will want to speak to everybody later on. We will give her a chance to share her a little bit about her accomplishment. But I have witnessed her rise from the ashes. So when I sit down and with my clients and they ask me, can I pull through? There's no doubt in my mind that they can. If my mom could pull through, anybody can. If you hear her stories, she has a couple of books here today, by the way. Again, if you donate and get those books, it goes to Norooz Clinic, but you will learn about her struggle and how she pulled through. Now, most important part, as you mentioned, Brother West, the wounded warrior. So just like my mother, I learned not to be a wounded herder, not to be a scarred helper or a scarred player hater, but a wounded healer. I healed myself, and I'm there to help others heal as well. Now, it's not about me, it is about the concept of wounded healer. We have to spread the word. We need your guys' help. We need your support for us to put more wounded healer on the streets, so they can go out there, help people who are suffering and who are hopeless. Now, to connect that to what is going on in the world right now, there's a huge movement, if all of you probably have heard, of the women's rights movements in Iran that is spreading to the Middle East. Everybody standing up for women's rights, but it's not just women's rights. It is about human rights. It is about millions of people who have been oppressed and subjugated. And interestingly, guess what? It is the weaker gender who is leading the revolution in Iran. It's the women who are standing up and demanding their rights. Interestingly, and that's from psychology, from trauma research, what we have always observed is that women are at the center of trauma everywhere in the world, and they are shielding everybody else from trauma. Give it up for women and women's rights and human rights. Anything you would like to add, brother?
I know I've had a wonderful night. This has been magnificent. But the important thing again is we're going to keep the focus on the suffering and how we can alleviate it and also do it with a smile, have a lot of fun, and continue to revel in each other's humanity.